Perfect. Well, I'm going to go ahead and pray, and then we'll just get right underway with stuff. And I'll kind of give you the lay of the land, how I'm going to do this, and we'll go from there. So, Jesus, I thank you for tonight. I thank you for Redemption Church. And I don't simply say that as, one of the leaders that's there. I say that as somebody that personally benefits from the fellowship of that church. I benefit, my family benefits. We are blessed by these people. And so I thank you that you've given my family the privilege of being part of just an amazing group that love you and want to do the right thing in gracious ways. And so tonight, as we kind of talk about what makes us tick, it always comes back to you. One of the things we'll talk about is that you really are the senior pastor of Redemption Church. We don't just say that in a trite way. We really mean that you are the authentic guide and leader of our church. And I pray that our hearts are always in tune with you, that we are desperate for more of you in our lives, in a sense of humility and just an awe of your grace. And that from that, we would live out the life that you modeled for us, that we would be lovers of people and lovers of God and fulfill the great commandment in a way that is honoring to you. So tonight, as we just kind of walk through what we are and who we are as a church, we do pray that you are richly glorified in all of that. And so we thank you and we praise you in your good name. Amen.
Amen.
Okie doke. So, kind of what I tend to do with this is I just spend, maybe the first. It kind of varies depending on the speed that I seem to go with it. But at least the first half, maybe a little less, just kind of walking through the highlights of that material that I sent out to all of you this last week. I don't get into all the details, which is kind of why I send it out in advance, but I just kind of hit on the things that make Redemption sort of unique. And then after I've done that, I just kind of go stem to stern. And then I really turn it over to all of you for any questions that you might have of either anything I touched on or certainly anything maybe I didn't touch on. Because one of the things I found over the years in doing this class is there are things that people have as not critical questions necessarily, could be, but I think just in general, either from their own background or they want to know something about us that they didn't touch on. And so I think sometimes it's more valuable for me to be able to let you have some opportunity to inquire about things that are unique to us, or maybe why we don't do certain things, because we get that one a lot. Like, well, how come you don't do X, Y, or Z? And sometimes we have really good reasons, and other times we're just like, wow, never really thought about it, or we get spread thin, and some things just fall between the cracks and that kind of thing. If there's anything that's true of redemption, it's part of one of our statements that we use kind of publicly, which is imperfect people redeemed by a perfect God. Oftentimes when people say, why don't you do this? And we're like, because we're imperfect, so, but we'll give you a chance to kind of inquire, like I said, about anything you might want to know about with us. And that'll be awesome. But I am going to get right underway. And really, this first part where I'm going to camp out a little bit is just kind of giving some of the things that make redemption. I say that because, we live in a community that has some other really great churches in town. And almost all of them outside of the Catholic Church are an evangelical type church. And so in some ways, we're all kind of playing on the same team for Jesus. But there are things in any church that kind of give it its unique flavor and the things that it plants the flag on, so to speak. And so with that, some of these are going to be probably familiar to you because we try to say them a lot, but others may not be as much. But when we really sat down in, I don't know, it's probably the last couple of years, we started 9 years ago, just a little over 9 years ago. And we were born out of kind of adversity. So we had been a part of a denomination and wanted to leave that denomination. There was a lot of churches that were wanting to leave that denomination at the time. It was known as the Evangelical Methodist Church. And through the process of seeking to leave, it was tumultuous and kind of riddled with all kinds of things, which you have any questions of that later, I'm happy to answer any of those questions. But out of that adversity, redemption was born. But what was great about the way it was born is it wasn't born out of bitterness. It wasn't born out of anger. In fact, when we went through our process seeking to withdraw from the denomination, we made a real point to say, you know what, we need to model what we see in the Sermon on the Mount. So if they're against us, we're still going to love them. They sued us multiple times in that process. We never countersued them. We were always just trying to get to this ultimate end of withdrawal. And so we knew that we needed to, love our neighbor, even if our neighbor didn't love us. We knew that we needed to turn the other cheek, go the extra mile, pray for the people that were, again, kind of against us. And many churches, all the churches that were trying to get out were simultaneously being sued by the denomination. It was very painful for a lot of those churches. And a lot of those churches didn't respond really well. They started to kind of fight fire with fire and that kind of thing. But we knew it was an opportunity to model, again, loving your enemy, even if your enemy is allegedly even a brother in Christ inside the denomination. And so from that, our people were able to witness sort of firsthand the spirit of this, of saying, we want to just kind of be like Jesus in all that we do. And so from that, then when time came and redemption was born, everybody that had been a part of that church came and started redemption. Just as things went with kind of the process with the denomination, we knew that the only way we were really going to be able to be independent was just to go ahead and just let them have all the property, just give it all to them and go and start something fresh. And so we just gave them everything. We didn't take even a toilet paper roll or a pencil from the building. We just gave them everything and went and started redemption. But we did so in a way that was really healthy and the people were unified and that kind of thing. But because we were born in this kind of chaotic, not planning on being planted, so to speak, everything was just put together really quickly. So, we started up in 7 days. We wrote our bylaws in 3 days. We wrote our purpose statement and mission, all this stuff, like literally at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday going into a Wednesday. And so because of the urgency of putting it all together for the first handful of years, we just kind of operated under those things because it was just the nature of it. But we finally had a chance to kind of slow down a little bit, assess ourselves and say, who are we really? What really is important to us? And so the material that I'm going through tonight that you have in front of you, a lot of this has come out more in recent years when we just kind of analyzed. And it wasn't so much like we looked at this and said, who do we want to be? But rather we were just asking, who do we seem to be? And then we put that on paper. And so with this, it says, why does Redemption Church exist? This is I'm kind of touching on the first 3 pages of that booklet I sent to you. And so, we kind of talked about what seems to be really passionate to us. And it was helping people believe that life is better with Jesus. And for some people, that seems kind of simplistic, but for us, it really does reside at the core of what is dear to us. And as a personal story, that line was something that has kind of been my own personal mission statement. And that came out of a time, about 15 years ago, where in ministry, I went through substantial doubt. I would really say that I was a closet atheist as a pastor. It was a relatively dark place. And what brought me out the other side of that wasn't so much that I came up with this great intellectual argument that made everything fit together. It was really just this conviction of, Matt, you're in this place, you think you have all this clarity, but you're miserable. And it just was that realization that I went, man, no, my life is better with Jesus, right? Like I don't have to understand everything about everything. I just know that my life is better with Jesus. And that's really what my journey back to faith was predicated on. And so with that, that's been, I think, much of the undertone then of us as a church. And so when we say helping people to believe that, we really, every one of these words is strategic. So helping means it's a journey. Believing is something that I think we kind of all grow in time. So maybe I believe it academically or intellectually or as a statement, but we want to get people to that point that says, you know what, I really look at my daily life and daily problems and daily challenges and the decisions I need to make. And when I'm kind of at a crossroad of either obeying or disobeying, trusting or not trusting, we want to help people to really believe that if they make the decision that Jesus would want them to make, and if they do life the way Jesus has outlined for us to live it, it's going to go better with them no matter what. And even if life still remains hard, that it's still going to be better to do those hard things with Jesus than without him. And so for us, it's very pragmatic, but it's also very theological. We want to mimic everything we see in Jesus. He left us an example to follow. And so we want to just help people to actually believe that life with him is better and following him is better and mimicking what he calls us to is better. So that just really became kind of our ultimate why in that sense. From that, we have what Redemption Church focuses on to help people to experience the why. And so, and this is a little bit more aspirational. We think we do these things, some better than others, but we know that this is also sanctification and growth. And so we said, well, we want people to feel welcomed. And you'll notice that it's ED on the end of all of these versus ING. there's a reason for that as well, which we said it doesn't matter if we think we're welcoming. What matters is if a person feels welcomed. And so we're always trying to think when it comes to our host groups or our people in general or regroups or whatever it is, we want us thinking in terms of it's not how I feel if I'm doing a good job, but rather how they feel as the recipient of these things. And so we're like, if a person doesn't feel welcomed when they come to Redemption Church, or they don't feel welcomed in a regroup or welcomed in a class or whatever it might be, then we need to keep assessing and go, how can we lean in to do that? Because ultimately that's about servanthood. And I think about even Jesus in Matthew 25, where he says, you know, you welcomed me when I was a stranger, you know, you visited me in prison. And we kind of looked at that and said, yeah, you welcomed me. Like that's what we want other people to sense with who we are as a church, especially being in a small town. We know that extends beyond the borders of even just Sunday morning and our fixed ministries. That's also when we see each other in town at Safeway or whatever else. A little trickier with the mask situation right now, but we want there to be that sense of, hey, we recognized you, we welcomed you, and you felt welcomed in our presence. From there, we realized that also means making people feel valued. And we want everybody to feel valued, whether they're a believer or a disbeliever, whether they're somebody that is lapsed in their faith, returning to their faith, seasoned in their faith, whatever it is. We want everybody to feel valued because ultimately God values people so much that he sent his son. So he's like, I'm willing to become both judged and judged for the sake of others. That's how much I value them. I desire to rescue them in a wholesale way by giving myself away for them. And so in the same way that Jesus proves value to us by coming for us, we want to do the same thing as the church. After that, we said, hey, we want to make sure that as people are here, they're coached. This has a lot to do with our discipleship program. So on page 2, I think it is, there's a little diagram at the bottom, and it kind of highlights things that are just true of the Christian life. These are the disciplines that we exercise as Christians, whether it be giving or loving our neighbor or reading the Bible or going to church, all these different kinds of facets. We know that that's a part of helping people to be coached. And coaching is also going to be a process. So we're always wanting to disciple. We're going to lean a bit more toward being a Bible teaching type church than maybe just a pure like short series, good advice stuff. I mean, we're going to do that sometimes. So like we did the master class series, I think it was last year. And actually what that was, people went, oh, that's a topical series that's a little bit more, you know, just designed to give good advice. Actually, it was a biblical counseling series rooted in theology. And we just kind of cloaked it in something that looked like kind of an easy to assess, you know, easy to grab series. But we're always thinking in terms of, no, we want to be imparting either, you know, theology, doctrine, or kind of biblical counseling in what we do. So we don't kind of work from the premise of saying, let's do something fun and hip and cool and then find a verse for it. We're always trying to figure out what is the biblical truth, but then how can we present this in such a way that it really does help people in their life and it really is practical. So it's not just purely intellectual theology, but it also has some utility to it as well. So that's a part of helping people to feel coached. We want them to have that sense of being coached here at Redemption Church. And then that will lead last to being unleashed. And this is the idea that everybody has something that Jesus wants them to do in life. And we believe that. So this is why sometimes we don't do all sorts of different ministries. People will come to us and say, well, how come we don't have a soup kitchen? And we're like, well, because that's on your heart and you should go do that. Or how come we don't offer this ministry to whatever it is, you know, the artists in town? Well, you're an artist. You feel led to that. You should go and do that. So we're all about trying to encourage people to figure out how, you know, everybody's a missionary. This is why even we have the podcast, The Everyday Missionary. Everybody's a missionary in their world. And so we're always trying to just remind people that, hey, the job of the church isn't to do all those things. The job of the church is to equip Christians to go and do the things that they feel led and called to do. So we try to keep our stuff as an organization relatively small, if you will, or programmatically. We don't try to have 50 programs. We try to keep our programs relatively finite. So it reminds people to figure out what it is that they want to do or what they like to do or what they're led to do, and they should go do that. And we champion that. So we've had people come to us and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this thing for a pro-life ministry. And we're like, great, you should go do that. How can we help you do that? We're not going to do it for you, but we're happy to help you do that. So it's things like that that we really try to encourage. So welcome, valued, coached, unleashed. These are really kind of what Redemption Church focuses on and our ultimate approach to people in ministry. Now, from that, It says, how do we connect our culture with the Pacific Northwest? This was just a series of statements that we said, this really is us for the most part. Some are more true of us than others, as far as some are more aspirational still, some are maybe a little bit more obvious. But the first thing is we just seek to be like Jesus. We just kind of looked and said, hey, what is the essence of the Christian faith or the essence of discipleship? And we're like, it means to be a follower of Jesus. And so that just means we want to mimic him. So if we're having a problem in life, if we're, having a neighbor that doesn't like us, if we're dealing with a bad boss at work or coworker, it's just as simple as seek to be like Jesus. Like, what would he have you do? Not what you want to do, not what your friend tells you should do, that may be bad counsel. Just, hey, let's just seek to be like Jesus. So that's important to us. So we make a big deal about Jesus a lot. The next thing, we err on the side of grace. And for some people, that's uncomfortable. Kind of the reason for this is A, the gospel is grace. B, the thing that makes Christianity unique from every other system religiously in the world is you don't earn it, it's grace. And so we believe that a church best displays the gospel by erring on the side of grace, that we would rather do that than err on the side of legalism or judgmental spirit. Sometimes what that means is that we say, you know what, we're going to let the Holy Spirit bring people along more than we're trying to bring people along. And so we'll sometimes take a little bit of a hands-off approach on some things, not everything, but we'll take a little bit more of a hands-off approach on some things and just say, you know what, we're going to let the Holy Spirit does a better job than we do of moving hearts and causing people to say, you know what, I don't want this practice or behavior in my life anymore. And I want to see something change. We believe if we're just kind of teaching the Bible, the Holy Spirit's going to work in that. We're going to continue to be gracious, and he's going to bring them along to at some point saying, hey, whatever it is, I want to do something different. I want to stop maybe this particular practice in my life. And then we continue to err on the side of grace and just trust the Holy Spirit to grow people. So this is a big part of our tone, and even why you'll probably hear a lot of transparency, personal expressions of weakness or frailty or whatever else, because we're just really trying to emphasize this particular point. The next one, we take the Bible seriously. Even though we err on the side of grace, we really do take the Bible seriously, which is why we like to teach it. And we're doing things like Ecclesiastes or Luke or whatever else. And so we really do believe it's God's book. And God's book has things to say to our lives. And we don't want to necessarily sugarcoat that. And at the same time, we don't want to make it so academic and difficult that, newer people can't grasp it or get it. Disbelieving people can't get it. We don't want to do that. So we're always trying to make sure that we take it seriously, but we also make it something that's approachable for people and they can, again, kind of grapple with it. Next, we believe that life is best lived with others. Of course, during COVID, this is trickier. But we do believe that, some of the best stuff that happens in our Christian lives is actually in closer relationships with other people. This is why we have regroups and Bible studies and things that allow people to connect with one another, because there's something that just comes out in that context. And sometimes it's because you get really close with people. And sometimes it's because you're in a group where some of those people kind of rub you wrong. But then from that, you have to learn to be kind and gracious and forgiving and, all these other great features as well. So it's not always that it's cozy. Sometimes it can be a little cantankerous, but that reminds us, oh yeah, I'm supposed to, again, go the extra mile, turn the other cheek, these kinds of things. And so community can help us even in those things. Another thing we say is that we encourage that everybody sweeps. This was a simple way of saying we all pitch in and help together, which is why, especially when we're meeting on Sundays, like at the high school, we could probably simplify some things and make, the amount of people that need to serve or volunteer, we could probably make that smaller at times, but we're always trying to create environments where people can serve. It's even why as a church, we keep a smaller staff than probably a lot of other churches, as far as like, we don't have a church secretary or things like that. Instead, we have 3 or 4 people that volunteer to serve in our secretary kind of pool, if you will. We don't have assistants for pastors. We have volunteers that assist pastors. So we're always trying to think in terms of creating opportunities for people to take ownership of the church. And therefore everybody sweeps more than like in some churches, they're just constantly hiring positions to fill all those things. But that's really not our heart. If anything, we try to hire people who can rally and lead volunteers. And so that's always a bigger priority to us than anything else. We ask, who can we invite or who can I invite? That's just kind of our missional arm. We don't want to, again, forget the fact that we're called to reach out to lost people, to love people estranged from the church. There's certainly people in this community uniquely that have had association with church in their lives and have been hurt, burned, whatever. And so we want to have, an outreach to them, and then people that know nothing, we want to have an outreach to them. And so we're always thinking about who can I invite. And then last, and this is probably what we're most known for outside of Redemption, is we do things for the good of the city. And this has been key to us since day one, because when we started, we really needed the city to survive. It was all the businesses in town opened themselves up so we could have Bible studies and groups and things like that. The school opened itself where we can meet as a church. The businesses advertised us, everything else. And so the city really became a refuge for us when we started. And so we knew that we wanted to really give back consciously to the city. And so we were always trying to think, how can we do something that partners with them, that shows we're in solidarity with them? An example of this would be like, even when the Chamber of Commerce said, hey, we're not going to do the Halloween stuff for the kids this year, we as a church could have still done like a trunk or treat or some kind of thing. But we said, you know what, if the businesses aren't going to do it, we're not going to do it. We're standing in solidarity with the businesses. If the businesses can't do certain things, we're not going to do certain things as well. So we kind of look at things from that perspective. We're always reaching out to city council and to the mayor, and saying, hey, what is it you need from us? How can we help you out in some ways? Even with our future building that we're hoping to see come together, which I'll be talking about that here in the next couple of weeks. Some really cool things are beginning to materialize with that are just, again, God doing some really cool stuff. But we looked at that building and said, we don't want to make it look like a church. We really want it to be for the community. We want to have the parking be open to the city because the city doesn't have downtown parking and they really want it. So we approached the city and said, we're going to totally let you use this parking every day of the week. We only need it on Sunday. Other than that, if you need it for park and ride, if you need it for other events or things, great. If you need us to build a trail down to the park as a secondary trail from our parking, we will happily do that. So we've done financial things like raise money for the arts community, raise money for the dog park. We give away an annual science math scholarship every year for $3,141, which is pi. So we think we're really clever. But we intentionally make it a STEM scholarship. And it's open to anybody. Doesn't matter if they're a person of faith or not. And so we're just always trying to think about how we can do things for the city. And the good thing about that is, like I said, that's given us a reputation in our community that's pretty healthy. I mean, even people that are disbelieving people that have reached out to me personally and say, I don't like evangelicals, especially. I think they're nuts, but your church seems really nice. So thanks for not being punks in our community. So it's kind of like, all right, that's great. I'll take that one anytime. And so we continue to always let that be our driving force in everything that we do. So what that all begins to look like is kind of on page 3. This is a diagram that usually I'm able to draw out on a board and do it all that way. I can't do it that way on this as easily, but it's a diagram that shows kind of theologically, here's how we understand the world. Jesus, when he came into the world, started the kingdom. So when he's talking about the kingdom, we really believe the kingdom began at the first coming of Christ, and the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom on earth, they touch at the consummation of all things. When Jesus returns, doesn't even matter what your end times views are. Basically, we're saying when he comes back, it wraps everything up, and heaven and earth touch in such a way that the kingdom is both in heaven and on earth. It's just one giant kingdom of his. But it started in the first coming, and it does have life on earth. And so what it is the church is aware of its life in the kingdom. The church is aware that it communicates this message of the kingdom. But churches react, or not react, I think they interact with kingdom life in different ways. So in looking at that diagram, some churches would be right in the middle of the white. In other words, they'd say, we know we have life in the kingdom, we're representing the kingdom, but they're a little bit more sectarian when it comes to the world. So they're like, the world's bad, we're more good, we build up walls, we don't want the world to come in. And that's sort of one vision. That's a sectarian vision. And there's some churches like that. There are other churches that are more syncretistic, and they would be out in the black part pretty deep. And they're the ones that say we need to be just like the world to reach the world. And with that, they probably have a bit more liberal leanings in their theology and doctrine. They're going to be a little bit more socially driven than they are probably biblically driven, where the other church, the sectarian church out in the middle of the white, is sometimes so biblically driven. They don't sound terribly gracious or kind. They sound a little bit more judgmental and harsh, and that kind of thing. But we said as a church that we're riding this really weird line, which is we want to advance the kingdom. We want to be a forward operating post, if you will. Where we say, you know what, we're going to do things in such a way that from a cultural perspective, we're trying to figure out how we can leverage the culture, but not at the cost of our biblical convictions. So we're constantly playing this game of being a little bit more subversive. Right. So if you got the sectarian church that says, keep the world out, and you got the syncretistic church that says, let all the world in, we're subversive, where we say, hey, we're going to kind of use world things, provided they don't ask us to sin. They don't require us to sell out our character or our values, but we want to kind of do things and communicate in such a way that we can connect with the culture that we live in. And so, because part of what we sort of know when it comes to sharing our faith is that people need to feel like they're like me. Like, I don't want to go to be a part of a group where I show up and I'm like, these people are not like me in any way. Like I wouldn't even know how to have a friendship or hang out with them. It would be super weird, And so, and I've even had that happen in different churches in our broader area. I've gone to like church visits on Sundays, and I'll go into one and I'm like, wow, these people are nothing like me at all. I would never go to this church, not because it isn't teaching the Bible or doing good things, but there's something about that ability to feel camaraderie. And I think like this could be a place where I could land that's really important. And so for us, we know where we live. We live in a tech community, basically. We live in a place that has just unique dynamics, and we just embrace that, especially since we take up for the good of the city. We know that we're just going to end up doing things that other people might kind of go like, really? Like we give a STEM scholarship, or we've brewed beer and sold it to make money to give to city events. And because it's just beer's big here. Microbrew is huge here. So we've just leveraged that, and we called it Redemption Ale, and we sold it during Duval days, and all proceeds went to either the arts or the dog park or the high school or whatever was needed at the time. And so for some people, they love that. Other people, they're a little uncomfortable with it, but that's kind of the best way we can describe it, is that we're just always saying, our theology is a closed fist. We hold it tight. We're not going to let that go. But the way we interact with culture is a little bit more open-handed, and we're always figuring out how we can, again, build more bridges and relationships there. And part of that goes back to this idea that we're missionaries. So good missionaries, when they go into other cultures, they learn those cultures. They don't try to impose Christian culture on those cultures. They understand those cultures and then subversively work within that to bring the truth to bear on that. That's all we're doing. We're just looking at ourselves as missionaries to, this Metro East Side, small town, whatever it is thing, and figuring out the best way to do that. So that's our heart behind all of that. So I'm going to stop right here for a moment, just to see if there was any questions about that chunk. Cause that's, like I said, that's more the flavor and feel of redemption right there. The things I'm going to go into next are a little bit more technical, but I just want to see if there was any commentary, question, concern, anything. Man, easy peasy. I'm loving this. This is perfect. So dig it. All right. So next, really quick here, our beliefs section is page 4 to page 9. And I don't typically go into a lot on this particular section, partly because you have it in front of you and you can read through it. What I would say is that we are a conservative evangelical church. That's what we are. And so, when you read that statement, that's what you're going to see. And that's going to be very true to all the evangelical churches in town. Now, what maybe is a little bit unique about us is within evangelicalism, you can have different distinctives, right? So you can have charismatics and you can have non-charismatics, you can have Calvinists and you can have Arminians. Our statement is we actually aimed to make it an orthodox statement that didn't pick any of those camps by design. That's actually by design. And some people have said, well, we should get more particular about that. There's two reasons why we don't. One is because we see value in the different things, provided that there isn't division. So what we're more concerned with isn't so much whether we have a tongue speaker at Redemption or somebody that doesn't believe in tongues for today. What we care about is that neither one of those parties would become divisive in their opinion on that, because there are many things within evangelicalism that, nobody's going to be positive on. There's always going to be a hanging question mark on some of these things. And so we actually said unity is really dear to us. And on things where there isn't absolute clarity, we want to leave room for that diversity and let, love and the things that we're certain about, let that be what we really rally around, which is why then our statement is the way it is. So as an example of this, I would fall more into the Calvinist realm theologically. But I would say I'm a Calvinist that A, loves joy, and B, loves mystery. And so I've been around Calvinism most of my pastoral life. And in that, I've seen a lot of sourpuss Calvinism and kind of sometimes harsh Calvinism and everything else. And everything has an answer for everything. And that's not going to be me necessarily. I understand it. I get it. But I fall more into the Calvinistic realm nonetheless. Same with Pastor Scott. He would be over there. Trent's kind of nondescript in some ways on those kinds of things. And then Dana, who handles our children's ministry, would be more on the Arminian side. Reese, who's our finance director and deacon, is probably a little bit more on that side as well. And we really get along. These don't become divisive points. In fact, if anything, we can even joke about them. And that's something that's really healthy, because I actually can look at Dana or Trent and say, I totally know why they come from where they do, and it's authentic and it's thought through. I have no problem with that. I think that's awesome. And so that's even true with our elders. We have some elders that are very much Arminian, and we have some elders that are very much Calvinistic. And there is great unity and love among all of us. And it doesn't become a sore spot. It'll become a source of conversation sometimes, but it just isn't something that is hurtful or harmful. And so we think that's actually the cooler thing. Within our team, we have, again, a tongue speaker and a person that doesn't believe in tongues for today. And they really dig each other and love each other and respect each other in their positions. So there's something in that Jesus has just been gracious with us. In all of our time, we've never had these become divisive points. And so, that's why I said kind of earlier that the bigger thing would be if somebody decided they wanted to become divisive over something that there isn't absolute clarity on, we would step in there, and it'd be less the topic. It would be probably more the delivery of the topic. And we would say, hey, let's all have a lot more charity in these things than maybe, specificity, when specificity just isn't going to be due. If we all could see it so clearly, then nobody would disagree and it would be a piece of cake. And so that kind of gives you a sense of who we are. We've just kind of said Orthodox, but we're not picking any particular subcamp in that, all the way down to end time stuff. Like probably our end time statement's the most open-ended statement of everything we have. We're just like, there is an end. Jesus is coming back. That's going to be awesome. And then that's kind of what it is. It just stops right there. But when I kind of get through the ordinance part, I'll see if you have any particular questions on theology or doctrine or how that works or whatever else. But that gives you a sense of kind of our stuff there. As to ordinances, we have 2 because we are Protestants. We are not Catholics with 7. We're Protestants with 2. So we have baptism and communion. When it comes to baptism, and again, this goes back to our kind of generosity element. We are believer baptism as a church. So in that sense, we're almost Baptistic, which means we don't baptize babies. We really have it be a thing where it's like when the person makes a confession of faith, that's when we would have them then choose baptism. We wouldn't say be baptized and then later down the road make a confession of faith. We'd say make a confession of faith and then you're baptized. With that said, we definitely have people that have come to Redemption and said, well, I was baptized in the Presbyterian church or the Methodist church or whatever environment. And I believe, when I was baptized as a baby, that was a legitimate baptism. And we'll look at that and say, that's awesome. We totally are cool with that. Once again, because there are really godly people on both sides of that discussion. And we wouldn't want to suddenly impose ourselves and say, sorry, no, you have to be baptized as a believer in baptism to have an authentic baptism at Redemption Church. We don't do that. So we don't personally baptize babies. We don't go down that road. But anybody that either A, opts to do that, like, through some other means, or was baptized as a baby and considers it a legitimate one for them, we think that's wonderful, and we're big fans of that. That's our Presbyterian heart coming out on that one. So as to communion, we see communion as something only for believers. And there's different ways the communion sort of viewed in church ranks, right? So you got the Catholics who believe it literally becomes body and blood. You've got the memorialists, some sort of like the Southern Baptists, that say it's just purely a symbol. We fall sort of in the middle of those two ideas. And so we would be what's called receptionistic. I know this is, you will never probably remember the word again, but the bottom line of it is that it's not purely a symbol, and it's not the body and blood, but there's something supernatural that is involved in communion. And so, we're not just saying it's it's not just purely just like, oh, here's these elements and they have no supernatural connection whatsoever. They do. And we see that in 1 Corinthians, where Paul says, hey, when you eat, and drink in an unhealthy or unworthy fashion, he says, then you eat and drink judgment to yourself. He says, this is why some of you are sick and weak, and even some of you have fallen asleep. And so when he says that, he's pointing out the fact that there is something supernaturally connected to the proper taking of communion that can have an effect on a believer in an adverse way if taken in an adverse way. Now, what the adverse way would be, like in 1 Corinthians 11, would be you're not loving your brothers and sisters. So, communion was divided between the rich and the poor. The rich were taking it without the poor because they just didn't really like the poor that much. And so the problem there was you weren't loving your neighbor as yourself in the process of taking communion. That would be the unworthy way. All of that to say, we just think that, again, communion is somewhere between radically supernatural and just purely symbolic. We say, no, it's between those two truths. And so we try to honor it that way as much as we can. We're not heavy-handed with, we always say, hey, or at least we try to always say, this is something for those who have, following Christ, accepted Christ. If you're a visitor with us this morning, we're super glad you're here. Just let that tray pass by. Like, we really try to emphasize that as much as we can, because it is for believers only, but we don't have what's called a closed table. Some churches actually do that, where they'll be like, if you're not a member of the church, then you're forbidden from taking communion. We don't go that far. We let the trays go out there openly and freely, but we certainly encourage that it's only for believers, whether they're a member or not. We just say, if you're following Jesus, great, this is for you. And if not, just go ahead and let it pass by, and don't feel awkward in that. It's totally cool. So, any questions on either A, doctrinal stuff, or B, kind of the communion or baptism elements? Pretty easy on my part. Keep it pretty simple. So, rad. All right, now I'm going to go into our leadership. This is like pages 10 to 16, basically, and I'll try to kind of blaze through this a little bit, because there's a lot of moving parts in there, but the simplified form of our leadership in our org chart, if you will, is authentically, we started day one and said Jesus is the senior pastor. We put Jesus as our senior pastor in the org chart. And there was two reasons for that. One is, when you read through the New Testament, no human being is ever called a senior pastor. I'm not a senior pastor. That's not my title at Redemption Church. You never see a human being get that title, but you see Jesus get that title. So he's the chief shepherd. You see that in Hebrews. You see it in 1 Peter. And so we looked at that and said, if he's the chief shepherd, then he's the senior pastor. He should be in the org chart. So we did it for that reason. But then the other reason we did this is to remind us in our eldership structure that our job is not really to lead Redemption Church. Our job is to listen to Jesus. And then from that, we are to disseminate what we sense is what he wants us to do as leaders in the church. And again, that goes more than one way. I mean, part of that is very concrete. Like, our job is to, if we're seeking to be like Jesus, going back to kind of page 1, then we're looking at this and saying, we're going to let the red letters of the Gospels drive a lot of our decision-making process. We're going to let the Sermon on the Mount dominate the way we try to understand doing ministry. So that's part of what that's going to be. It's just very concrete. The Bible tells us what to do as leaders. We're going to seek to do that as much as possible. Whether that's always effective or not, that shouldn't factor in. We should look at things and say, you know what? if we do this according to the Bible, we may not be successful, but we're not called to be successful. We're just called to be faithful. So that drives part of it. The other part is probably a little bit more the subjective side, which is, the elders will get into circumstances where we're left having to choose A or B. Both are good. And therefore we need to make sure we're just really praying this out. If the Bible doesn't tell us exactly what to do, then we just need to be really prayerful, going to Jesus, saying, Jesus, what do you want to do with your church? This is your church. We want to have a listening ear for this. So that's why we also said, hey, Jesus is a senior pastor. We don't want to be too cool for school and so smart that we don't consult him on these things. And so an example would be like our building stuff. When we went into this a few years ago, buying the hub and looking to do this, all along the way, every time there was a hurdle, we didn't sit around and discuss very much like, how do we deal with the hurdle? We said, we need to pray about this. And then we're going to trust that he's going to guide us in this, and we're going to know what to do next. And that's the way it's worked. And I'll explain how that plays out then in a more functional way with our elders, but I'll hold on to that here for just a second. When it comes to actually people being elders, they're kind of the next layer, if you will, in the org chart. We have a mixed group of elders. And so all of our pastors are elders. And then we also have elders on our team that are not paid by the church. So we have both pay and lay elders. And we will, outside of some crazy fluke, would always want to have paid and lay elders. Now, the most radical thing would be is if we had to lay off all of the paid elders, we would just have lay elders, and that would be fine. Like churches do have pure volunteer elderships, and we would support that too. Our dynamic allows us to do both. But we always want to make sure that non-paid elders are a part of our board because they bring a different type of perspective and a different type of accountability. And so we see that as being pretty critical to what we do. So we have at this point 3 lay elders, which is Steve Rutherford, Sterling Monroe, and Tom Potter. And then we have 3 paid elders, which is myself, Scott, and Trent. So that's the current composite. We've had some more, and some have moved and some have stepped off for a season and things like that. But right now we're sitting at 6. The way a person becomes an elder at Redemption Church is a little bit of a process because once they're an elder, they are an elder for life. So they don't serve terms necessarily. Once they're an elder for life, because we don't see it as an office. We see it as a gift. And we would never take somebody that has the gift of something and say, well, you have to serve a term with your gift. We wouldn't do that with a person that has mercy or giving or teaching or whatever else. And so we look at an elder as a gift. And so we don't make it a term. But they can be removed by the board overall for some kind of indiscretion if need be, or they can take a break for some season of time. If just family or life or whatever determines that, they can totally take a break, and they're still kind of an elder in reserve until they come back active to the board. Now, the way they go about this is we have a class that we do every few years called Praxis. We're just wrapping up Praxis for this year. We'll probably offer it again a couple of years, but it's 1 year. So it's twice a month, 2 hours per class. And you have to go through that entire program. And as you're going through it, what we never do is approach anybody and say, hey, you should think about becoming an elder. We don't ever do that. What we do is say, if you feel led to this, you should take this Praxis class. And then you'll find out from there whether this is for you or not. So they start taking the class. The first half is very much about life in the local church as a leader and what the Bible calls leaders to and all that kind of process. The second half becomes a little bit more practical shepherding. And then in there, there's some evaluations. We call the wife of a potential elder to say, hey, how are they at home? You're only the Christian you are in your own house. Like we want to know. And so there's a lot of kind of vetting that goes on in this. And the heart behind it is not that Praxis builds an elder. We don't build anything. The Holy Spirit builds elders. We're just trying to discern if somebody's meant to be an elder. So we created this process, frankly, to wash people out more than train people to be elders, because we assume that if they're an elder, they are by gifting. We're discerning that through the process. And by the end of that, if they've gone through the whole thing and they've taken the self-evaluation, we've talked to their families and it's all looking good, then our elders, they have to have 100% affirmation of a potential elder candidate. If they 100% agree, then that name goes to our members. and the members have to have a 90% affirmation of that person. And then if the members do that, then that person comes onto the elder board and they serve as an elder for, at that point, for life, because again, like I said, it's a gift, not simply an office. The other thing that's interesting about this and why we do praxis so a person understands what it looks like to be an elder at Redemption is our eldership operates under 100% unanimous agreement. So we do not do majority vote. We do not do 66%, 75%. It has to be 100% agreement among all of our elders on any decision that is made. We look at the New Testament where it says they were all of one spirit and one accord. And we said, you know what? We think that's the thing to strive for. We also like it because having sat in churches that do the voting system in their leadership teams, what would happen is that 2/3 would say yes, 1/3 would say no, and then the 1/3 has to walk out and pretend like they agree. And sometimes that goes good and sometimes that goes bad. And so what we really noted is that it's better to say we have to 100% agree. And if we're not coming to agreement, hey, we got more to pray about. We got more to talk through. We don't have to rush to any decisions. And so it has served us tremendously well. Now, sometimes we'll go long periods before we get to a consensus. And that's okay. It's better to be patient and wait than to try to force something through. So that's really good. Another thing about that is that sometimes you have one person that's kind of in the no category. Everybody else is in the yes. And then after maybe 6 or 8 weeks, everybody swings to the no. It's not always like the minority swings to the majority. Sometimes it's the opposite. Because if you're praying it through and you're asking for the Spirit to guide you, and Jesus, you're our senior pastor, what he wants us to do, those kinds of things really can move the heart in such a way that what you didn't envision becomes the reality of what you're supposed to do. So there's a truth to that. And then the other part of this that I just, for candor, is in the 100% agreement, it doesn't always mean that every one of us is totally on board. So what can happen sometimes is I go, you know what? I'm not sure, but you all seem really confident and I trust you. You're my elders, because that's also what's true. Since this is kind of a Knights of the Round Table attitude where everybody has equal authority, the pastors don't have more authority than the lay elders or vice versa. It's all 100% equal authority because it's 100% agreement. There are times where I'll go like, you know what? You understand this issue more than me. You're really passionate about it. I'm not sure. I'm supporting your conviction here. So I'm a yes because I believe in your heart on this, maybe more than I'm always at peace on something. That can happen to some degree. It's not very common, but to some degree, that's just kind of the reality that, you know, some people are just more passionate than others and we trust each other. And so that still turns into an ultimate affirmation of 100% yes. So that is a very unique way, I think, for some leaderships to do things. But for us, it served us very well and created a lot of health and stability in our leadership over the years. But it's also why we take so much time for a person to come on to our eldership board, because if they don't understand those values and they go, oh, I want to become an elder because I have an agenda and I want to see the church do this thing I'm passionate about, it's not going to be a good fit for them or for anybody else, you know? And so we take a lot of time. So they go through praxis for a year. They go through about another 6 months of sitting on the board as kind of an observer and that kind of thing, but without any, you know, quote, authority. And then they are ultimately affirmed by the elders and affirmed by the membership to become an elder. Under that, we have deacons. Deacons also have to take praxis, but they're instilled or installed by the elder team. So that's not something that the members necessarily affirm or vote on for deacons. And deacons are sort of created out of necessity. So if we have a ministry that's so substantial that we go, that we need somebody that's kind of endowed with that type of authority, then we have a deacon do that. So whether it be children's ministry or finances or women's or whatever it is, we do it that way. Our elders are male only at Redemption Church. Our deacons are male or female. And so we have both in the deacon camp. And so my wife is a deacon, Reese Vinterton, that handles our finances, is a deacon. Michelle Rutherford is a deacon, and Dana she's done praxis. We just got to wrap it up, but she is ultimately a deacon as well. So that's our deacon pool at Redemption at this point. But again, it's sort of driven by necessity more than anything else. Then last, it's the members. It's you all, why you're here, what you're doing, that kind of thing. So what we usually encourage is a person's at redemption for at least 3 months, because we always say, we'll have people that like week one, they'll come like, wow, we really love this place. And we're like, give us 3 months. We'll say something that you don't like. And after that, if you still want to become a member, then great. That's fantastic. But we encourage at least sticking around for a little while. And then we say, hey, attend the membership class. And then fill out some forms that I will actually email out to everybody tomorrow. So you can look at those over and fill those things out if you feel like you want to take that step. And what that kind of entails is just a certain set of commitments. And so the commitments are regular attendance at redemption, financial giving, personal ministry involvement. That's the everybody sweeps. And just living out kind of our identity. Now, what I want to say about the financial giving aspect, this is something that day one, I felt led to do. And at first our elders were like, you're crazy. And it's been really, really great. So a lot of churches say to be a member, you have to give to the church as a member. We looked at the New Testament and said the New Testament never commands Christians to have to give to their local church. The New Testament commands Christians to give somewhere, in whatever way the Holy Spirit calls them to. So what we said is, you don't have to give to redemption. The Bible is clear. We need to all be giving. If you decide to give to redemption, awesome. But you need to give wherever the Holy Spirit's called you to give, and the spirit of the way the New Testament outlines that. So we always just say, you know what, if you give here, great. If you give elsewhere, great. You're just called to give. A lot of people say, no, part of membership is you have to give to your local church. And we said, well, we can't really build that case biblically. We can't prove that, besides the fact that even membership itself, as we're doing it, is not really in the New Testament. So let's not start creating a bunch of laws that aren't even in the Bible. But what's been fascinating about that is we've never had this big push that said you had to give here. And we've always ended up having a surplus every year for 9 years. So it's like God's just even blessed that in our world in a lot of ways. And so that's where we just make this encouragement. And so basically, those are the things a member pledges to. And then anytime we're going to have some type of affirmation that the members engage in, whether it's an affirmation of having to change the bylaws, which requires an 80% approval of the members, or if it's the affirmation of an elder, which requires 90% of the members. Every time we have a ballot of affirmation, what the member does on that is it's almost like a chance for them to go, am I engaged? Am I showing up? Am I serving at the church? Am I doing what a Christian's supposed to do as a member of a church? They check off those boxes, they sign their name, and then they render whatever affirmation we need to do. So we kind of treat those times as both personal reflection and assessment of, am I doing what a member does, as well as part of this is the member then affirming or not affirming something. The other part of that I want to mention, why we actually have members write their names on these ballots, is because it's not really a vote. I mean, it is and it isn't. The heart of it is that the elders want to know the heart of the church. And so let's say we come to the church with a person and say, hey, we want you to affirm them for eldership. And then we get all of those pieces of paper back, and we had 7 people that said no. We can go back to those 7 people, not to convince them, but to actually say, did we miss something? We might have missed something, because they might say, yeah, I know that guy. I work with him. He's awful, And then we can be like, okay, we need to do some more homework on this. This is really good. But it allows us to actually interact and be communicative with people when they may have a difference or disagreement, as opposed to it's like this hidden vote. We don't know who they are, and therefore we can never interact. This always goes back to our heart is to shepherd, and not just simply to have a voting system as the mechanism. And for the most part, I think everything we've ever gone to the members for affirmation is, with, I think, 2 exceptions, been 100% approval on everything over the 9 years. And the ones that weren't, it was one on hiring a student ministries director and one on a bylaw change. And it was like one person each time. And we were able to just go and find out. And they're like, nah, I have no good reason. I just didn't like them. Okay. At least we know, and they were honest with us. Like, I don't have a good reason. I just don't like them. Okay, that's great. But we could just double check, because, what you don't want is to have 9 people say no, and you don't know who they are, and, it stirs up strife or whatever else. You don't want that. We treat unity pretty precious around here. And so we always try to work toward that as much as possible. So that is how people become elders. That's how people become members, taking this class, doing these things. And then just the last thing I'll touch base on here really quick, and then I'm going to turn it over to you all, is, I mentioned the change of bylaws, which is pretty rare for us. We don't really try to change bylaws. Everything you have in that packet is pretty much just our bylaws in a different configured way. It's all the same content, just less crazy than what the state wanted when we started off. But we intentionally try to keep our bylaws very small, because there's always a danger that when a church has a problem, it writes a new rule. And that's how bylaws go from 20 pages to 200 pages. And we're like, we would rather solve problems with relationship than with rules. So we try to keep our bylaws and that information pretty frozen, just because, again, we're not looking to create an entire, volume of extra stuff that then nobody even can keep track of. And the last section, though, things related to budget and money and that kind of thing. So the members don't affirm or vote on budget, but the elders, they report the budget every year to the members. A member can reach out to Reese at any time and say, I want to see the books. So they can get open sight to the books. That's no problem. But what we do is usually in November, we send out an email. It has the budget for the upcoming year that's there, the budget for the previous year, what was spent, kind of the profit loss sort of, so to speak, categories. And then also we do an annual compilation with an outside CPA. And we decided to do that because there's Christian organizations that will do that for churches, but we decided to go to a non-Christian organization because we prefer that a disbelieving person is looking at our books, because it really makes you go like, hey, if we have shenanigans, you really don't want the disbeliever to come down on you. So we actually decided to do it that way because we're like, if an unbeliever thinks you're doing it right, when they can be really critical of Christians with money, then we're really happy about that. So they do that work, and then we send out that report to the members every year as well. So they get the review from the CPA, they get the previous year's budget and what was spent, they get the future budget and what we're tracking, and then they get like the balances of all the accounts and that kind of thing. So we just did that last week, I guess it was. I think roughly there. The weeks are starting to draw together. But the elder set that. The one exception where we do not have unanimous decision-making with our elders is that the paid elders, they do not set their own salaries. They are not a part of the decision-making in setting their own salaries. So when that comes up at any time, the lay elders ask for my input, like, well, how's Scott been doing? How's Trent been doing? What would be your annual review of their job performance? They'll ask me that. And then I leave the room. So we have no voice in any of those decisions. And that's, again, just because I've known of churches where it was the paid elders that were setting their own salaries. And then it blew up in their face. Like, well, that seems to be, probably not above board or always going to be as clear thinking as it should be. So that's the only time that half the elder board steps out of the room on decision making. So we do the rest of the stuff, like we're helping put together the budget and we're figuring out the ministry budgets, all of that. The paid elders are in there for that, or the pastors. But when it comes to their own salaries, then we all step away and the volunteer elders handle that 100%. So that is kind of our financial side of things. And that kind of wraps up my spiel on kind of the things that make us tick and maybe some of the unique things about us. But again, I don't know if there's any particular things that you may be curious about or concerns you might have about some of this, or just inquiry of any kind. This is sort of your time. And don't feel pressure too, because you might be like, we don't have any questions. I got to make something up. You don't have to make something up. But if you've got questions, that's wonderful. I'm happy to take them.
So the kind of crucial thing about this meeting, what do you think like a member is signing up to do, to be, that's different from somebody who attends regularly and gives and is part of the serving of the church and all those other things you outlined?
Yeah, I think that there's one that's kind of technical, right? Which is when we have these decisions to be made, whether it be for changing things or bringing on leaders or whatever else, that they certainly play that role of affirmation. I think the other part of membership, frankly, is just solidarity and buy-in. I think it's a sense in which, I think in my own world, even I tend to have an apprehension to become a member of anything because that's just kind of my nature a little bit. But I think based on that, then when I go, I'm going to become a member of something, it's just more because I'm saying, you know what, I believe in this, I buy in this. There's a certain sense of ownership that comes with that membership. I'm affirming that I'm committing to these values. And that just gives me a different level of accountability to it. Because one of the things we even talk about with people when they become members is we say, you know what, you're sort of saying, I'm going to become an ambassador of what this ministry is all about. And that doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that we do. Man, I wrote the bylaws and I don't agree with everything in the bylaws. Oddly enough, I wrote them to a kind of a median thing that isn't always even reflective of my own personality or tastes at times. But I'm like, hey, for the greater good, and because I ultimately believe in this cause, I still want to be a member of this thing. And the things where I probably would do it different, it doesn't really matter to me as much because I just really believe in being an ambassador of what this represents to our community. So I think that's really foundationally in my mind what it means. The other part is for those who may become like some kind of teacher, we want to get this eventually even down into the kid ranks. So far, it's been in the adult ranks. If somebody wants to lead a regroup or teach a Bible study or a class or whatever else, they do have to be members. So the other part of membership is it does give you access to some levels of involvement or teaching that would not be available if one wasn't a member. So that's one thing I meant to mention earlier that I forgot to. But all regroup leaders and Bible study leaders and everybody else need to be members because part of what you're committing to is saying, I'm not going to, again, run contrary to the values or the beliefs of Redemption Church, but rather I'll stow that for the greater good. Thank you for the question. That was a good question. Any other outstanding? Man, this is pretty easy, this one. I like this. This is good. So, here's the thing I'll maybe add to it as I send out the stuff tomorrow, which is, really like it's asking you, who is Jesus? What is the gospel? How did you become a believer? Like we're getting your personal testimony in that material. And then also in the material is stuff like, hey, this is where one day when things are kind of back to normal, I'll be able to serve. So, because, part of the membership thing is, hey, I'm involved in the functional reality that makes Redemption Church. But when you do all of that stuff, if you think of things that you're curious about, feel free to, drop an email to me about that. Like you're like, hey, I was thinking about this more. I was kicking this around a bit or whatever else. We love questions here. We don't always have an answer. Sometimes we'll be like, again, we don't know, or we hadn't thought about it or whatever else. But, don't feel like tonight's the only night you can ask any questions. But if something comes to mind over the next few days or weeks or whatever else, hey, always an open book. And as you kind of process this and think this out a little bit more and you say, you know what, yeah, we want to sign up right now. Awesome. That's great. What will happen is, you can just send that material back to me. I actually give it to Pastor Scott. He then calls you and kind of talks with you a little bit about your testimony and your story and everything else. And then from that, kind of ties up any loose ends there might be with questions you might have outside of asking me. And if you decide, hey, we're going to wait for a little while and kind of wait and see, that's equally cool too. It's interesting, David, when you brought up kind of the membership thing, and I think it's a Pacific Northwest thing uniquely. It's interesting how many people at Redemption serve in pretty substantial ways and contribute in substantial ways. And they're like, yeah, but I don't do membership. And I'm always like, it's the general spirit of the rebellion of the West. We settled it with cowboys. So there is a lot of that. And even in my own world, I think my personality sometimes, like I said, kind of leans that direction. Which is why then I go like, okay, no, this is something I really believe in. I'm willing to put my name on the dotted line and try to step up to those lines that are set just to, again, be an example, be an ambassador, and show that I believe in the cause. So. Well, awesome, you guys. Well, like I said, if anything comes to mind, please feel free to drop an email. I will warn you, I will probably respond with a voice note. This is what I do. I've decided that the best thing in the world for me is I give people their own personal podcast when I respond to emails. I learned years and years ago that I would spend tons and tons of time answering emails where I'm working through the tone and I'm putting smiley faces 50 different times. And I'm trying, and I'm like, no, I can just leave a voice note and I can control the tone completely. This is great. So this is what I love to do. So be forewarned, you might get your own personal podcast if you think of anything. So, yep.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's
my way. And it's helped a lot. I'll get emails from people sometimes where they're angry about something and I'll send them a voice note and it just disarms. Like, I can't think of a time it hasn't. You know what I mean? They'll like, well, I kind of see where you're coming from. I understand. I sounded mad at first. I'm okay now. And so it's a way better route versus I write something and inevitably it can get read 50 ways. And the way I didn't mean for it to get read, that's the way it's going to get read. So, yeah. So this is a freebie for tuning in tonight. How about that? Start using it in your own lives and world, especially when you get like family members that are mad about something.
Oh man.
Voice note them back. So,
good idea.
So awesome.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you making the time tonight. And like I said, I'll send out the email tomorrow. A link to this video will be attached, but you guys were here, so you've done it. But for the others, it'll be there as well. So again, anyway, have a great night. I'll pray before we close out. And again, thank you for your time. So let me go and pray. Jesus, I thank you for our the opportunity to just talk about the church that you have built, that you are growing and grooming and working out our weaknesses in. I thank you for your grace. It's, again, why we err on the side of grace. We know we need it. We know we are all too human and frail. And yet by your generosity and your love, you've given us your spirit. You've given us your own righteousness. You've given us a standing that is with you because of your love for us. And so we are thankful for all of that. And so, Jesus, I just praise you for what you're doing at Redemption. I praise you even for some of the stuff this week that has come about and just really cool things where it's clear, like you're just opening doors and doing things. And so I thank you that we really don't ever need to worry in life. You've always got it handled. It may not always be the way we planned it or hope it, but you've got great things in store for us no matter what, because again, you work out all things to good for those who love you and are called according to your purpose. So we thank you for that promise. And we thank you for your love toward us in your good name. Amen.